Check, check. Welcome to the Dire Wolf Show, where we believe that America is exceptional and that our constitutional rights should never be infringed. I am Dire Wolf. On our show, we bring you the truth and debunk fake news. If you love laughing at the insanity of the regressive left, sit back and relax. Boy, do I have a show for you.
All right. Welcome back, Wolfpack. This is Fox Reviews here for our weekly news recap from Behind Enemy Lines on YouTube, where speech is not free and the truth is demonetized. As always, great show for you tonight. But first, I would like to thank our sponsors. This show is only possible because people like you keep clicking on the We Want Live button and giving us a view count, which for some reason makes me feel like I need to keep doing this. Also, we would like to thank those of you who donate to us financially, who include Kaylet, Ori Main, Nathan, Cameron, Tetris Freak, Slowpoke Garcia, Thundra Erican, the White Lion, the White Wolf, the Timber Wolf, and the Dire Wolf. Money is not the only way you can give, though. We also appreciate you liking and subscribing to us on DLive, Twitch, and YouTube, and we especially like when you share links to the channel on any social media you happen to find yourself on, as we have no algorithm to do this for us. All right, well, big show for you tonight. Sorry I missed last week. It was no reason, just didn't feel like doing a show. I have that prerogative every now and then. All right, so first story of the night is, all right, this is a big one. After 3 long years on the run, Jussie Smollett's attacker has finally been brought to justice. Yay! Much rejoicing, much excitement. Very great. Who attacked Jussie? It's been 3 long years since we knew that he was attacked. But his attackers, we never knew who they were until now. We now know who attacked Jussie Smollett. And it was, wait for it, Jussie Smollett, who has now officially been found guilty of 5 counts of felony lying. His counts of guilty include lying to the police that he was a victim of a hate crime, lying to the police that he was a battery victim, lying to a detective that he was a hate crime victim, lying to a detective that he was a battery victim, and lying to another detective that he was a battery victim. I would say that he was also guilty of lying to the American people that he was a hate crime victim, but that apparently is not illegal as of yet. Each count has a maximum sentence of 3 years in jail and a $25,000 fine, which means Jussie Smollett could be facing a total of 15 years in jail and $125,000 worth of fines. However, being that he is a celebrity, black and gay, he has a lot of privileges that the average person on the street doesn't have. So it's likely he will get away with only the fines, and it might not even be the full amount of the fines. We'll have to wait and see. We could be surprised, but I would be unsurprised if he only got the fines. If he does get jail time, it would likely be less than a year. So this is the point in the case where, or in the trial, where the judge just gets to decide what the sentencing is. So there's maximum sentencing, and again, there's a maximum of 3 years in jail for each of those things, adding up to 15 years in jail. But the judge could just say, well, I don't feel like giving him any jail time because, he's a celebrity, which does happen a lot. Because, we have a equal justice under the law kind of a thing. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of you guys know the story of Jussie Smollett. But if you don't, for some reason, know what his story is, or if you are some internet archaeologist 1,000 years in the future watching this, here's a quick recap of what happened. So on the night of January 29th, 2019, that was a long time ago, during a polar vortex blizzard, Jussie was just struck with a sudden craving for a Subway sandwich. A sandwich which he was willing to give his life to protect. Very important Subway sandwich. At the same time, 2 white, this was what the story was, 2 white MAGA hat wearing Trump supporters, who were also avid viewers of the obscure TV show Empire, were also on a stroll through the industrial district of Chicago, better known as MAGA country, in a sub-zero blizzard in the middle of the night. They also just so happened to be holding a NASCAR garage pole and a Tabasco sauce bottle that they had filled with bleach, which, if Chicago doesn't want me to conceal carry, bleach and garage poles, then maybe they shouldn't have outlawed guns. Just saying. Now, these two groups of people, Jussie and these two white MAGA hat wearing Trump supporters, at 2 a.m. that night, these unlikely travelers crossed paths, and the game was on. Through the nearly zero visibility snowstorm, somehow the Empire-watching MAGA country denizens were able to see and identify Jackie. Lucky for them, they had their trusty NASCAR garage pole, and they knew what to do to protect the honor of Chicago's industrial district, MAGA country. How do we know that they were able to identify him? Well, the way Juski tells it, the white baguettes shouted at him by name, calling him, quote, that Empire N-word F-word, end quote. Sometimes that is referred to that as an acronym of ENF, as in LGBTQ AARP $ampersand, the number 2 graven hook X / T again, Egyptian Ankh, ENF. That community. And Jussie, someone who identifies as an ENF, immediately knew that they were talking about him, and knowing that his Subway sandwich was at risk, prepared himself to fight. At which point, the Empire-loving MAGA Chicagoans began to beat Jussie, placing a NASCAR garage pole around his neck and lightly seasoning him with bleach out of their Tabasco sauce bottle. As plausible as all of this sounded, I know you guys thought that was plausible. I thought it was plausible for the last 3 years. I was pretty sure that this was true. But it turns out that a jury of 12 Chicagoans was not buying it. And we may never know which part of that story they didn't believe, because it was all equally plausible. It was all equally well written. I would say seemed true. Definitely plausible and believable. So it's hard to say which part of that crazy story the 12 jurors didn't believe, but at least one part of it didn't stick with them. Maybe it was the part about the white Trump supporters really being black Nigerians that Smollett had paid to attack them. Or maybe it was the part about the red MAGA hats being just regular red hats that Jubilee had bought for them. Or maybe it was the part about the Subway sandwich. It's possible that a Quiznos fanatic had made it onto the jury, and that's why Jussie was found guilty. We may never know, though. We may never know. What we do know is that losing this criminal case now means that Jussie will likely lose his civil case, where the city of Chicago is suing him for the cost of the police investigation, valued at $130,000. And just for posterity, let's take a few moments to remember every celebrity and news agency that helped propagate this myth about Jussie's attack. Now, this is a 10-minute supercut, and we're not going to watch all of it, but it just gives you a sense of how much shilling and assisting with this false narrative the media helped out with.
Who were apparently wearing Make America Great Again hats.
I'm disgusted by people who wear hats that say MAGA. Make America Great Again. I don't like that it's being put out there in the media that this is a possible hate crime.
Right. And the media has really cast so much doubt on his story, which I find so personally offensive.
It's coming from the President of the United States. He's dog whistling every day.
The circumstances are just horrific.
And this is America in 2019.
The list of those who went public.
Yep, this is America in 2019. Man, just so terrible that there's such a lack of racism in America that you have to pay black immigrants to do hate crimes against Democrats. Because just regular Americans, we refuse to do those jobs. We're not gonna clean your bathroom. We're not going to work in a chicken plant. And we sure as hell are not going to beat up black people just because we don't like the color of their skin. That's not something that's not jobs that Americans are willing to take. But that's okay. That's okay. That's why the Democrats want to have unfettered immigration. They're more than willing to take on those tough, demeaning jobs that Americans just refuse to take. All right. So now there was another 9 minutes of this clip, as funny as I'm sure that would be to watch. But the media just goes on and on and on. You've got so many, probably 100 prominent Democrat politicians all singing Jesse's praises and woe is him, and this is you heard it from CNN there, this is America in 2019, so this is indicative of the racism in America, that people would just go out and attack Jesse Smollett because he's black and gay. He's an ENF, and it's just not true though. It never really happened, and this is something that always happens with the false media narrative, is that they will run as fast as they can with a totally made up story, the thinnest of plausible explanations for why something happened, and we're always stuck playing catch up with the false reality. This false story with Jesse, this happened at the beginning of 2019. Now I know what happened at the end of 2019 and into the next year there. And, our lives have changed in the last 3 years. But this narrative of Jesse, a quote-unquote black man, being attacked by Trump supporters, that fed into the kind of national conversation and the narrative that the Democrats wanted to propose or wanted to, hoist onto America, saying, we are a racist country. Trump supporters are racist. Conservatism is the embodiment of racism, and that needs to change. It's part of the systemic racism and oppression of black people, and that fed into this kind of the societal fabric, and that was part of the narrative when we had the George Floyd case. When we had the Rittenhouse case as well, was, of course George Floyd was killed because of racism. Look at Jesse. He was just walking around in Chicago in the middle of the night trying to go to Subway in a blizzard, and America's so racist, 2 white people jumped him. Of course a cop executed George Floyd. It's just it's a logical next step. It's the same thing with Rittenhouse. Of course Rittenhouse went to Kenosha to execute a bunch of black people because, look at what happened to Jesse. They hunted him down in the streets of Chicago and beat him up because he was black. It's just a logical next step that Kyle Rittenhouse would go to Kenosha to shoot 3 black people, even though that never happened. And so you've got this, we're always playing catch up. But the problem is that you can never catch up to it fast enough. It took 3 years. I mean, obviously, we all knew pretty quickly that this was a false story from the beginning. I don't think anybody was buying. Well, nobody on our side was really buying Jesse's story. But the mainstream media and the Democrat politicians were able to run with this story about him for 3 years. 3 years that they had to run with this. And again, that bolstered their narrative about what happened to George Floyd and what they thought Kyle did, and any number of other crimes that happened in the last 3 years. The whole BLM riots, all of that stuff. It's it's easier to justify the BLM riots when you think that there are white gangs of MAGA supporters hunting down black Hollywood actors, and it's I guess it's a natural response to that BLM's burning down cities now. But the problem is the predicate never really happened, and you can never go back to reform that narrative. And since then, we've now had new lies built into the narrative. The only reason why part of the reason why things like the George Floyd incident and the Kyle Rittenhouse incident and the riots, etc., part of the reason why those got so much traction in the first place was because there was a pre-existing narrative of racism in America. And Jesse's story fed into that. It fed into that pre-existing narrative. And then now that we're in the future beyond those events, now the George Floyd event, now the lies about the Kyle Rittenhouse events, those have fed into the national narrative about how America is racist. And we just a couple of weeks ago were able to debunk the Kyle Rittenhouse incident by his being found innocent or found not guilty in his court case, and also blowing the minds of liberals all over Twitter that he didn't kill any black people that night. Now they've kind of realized, oh, okay, maybe we made a mistake with that one. But the damage was done. There's laws. There was anti-lynching laws proposed in the House by Cory Booker based on what happened, or based on what didn't happen to Jesse Smollett. You had other prominent black celebrities like Bubba. Gosh, I don't know what the hell his name is. I know everybody called him Bubba Smollett, but the NASCAR guy who thought that the garage pole on his garage was a noose and lied about that, and had a team of 20 FBI agents down there investigating this garage pole rope. Part of the reason why he felt so comfortable in doing that was because other people like Jesse were getting so much fame off of their, what ended up being a false report of a hate crime. And there is a lot of false hate crimes out there. In fact, I would say that almost all of them are. The truth is that there just really are not in any countable amount black victims of hate crimes. Whoa, isn't that? No. There really is not. And the reason why you can say pretty definitively that there are no and have not been any real hate crimes against black people in this country for at least a decade is because every single minor slight against a black person, perceived or fabricated, has become international news every time it happens. Why would a NASCAR driver seeing a weird loop on a garage pole loop? Why on a garage pole loop? Why did that gain so much traction? Why did a story from and this is kind of an archetype at this point, but I'm remembering a specific story from a university where a black student said, "Oh, the janitor told me I couldn't be in here, and they told me it was because I was black that I wasn't allowed to be in this in this building to eat my lunch," when the truth came out that no one told her that, and that building was actually closed and she was trespassing on closed school property. And none of that ever came out. What did come out is that it was another student being she's so much racism that she's got to deal with. It's so hard for black students on college campuses now, even though they're having all of these crazy scholarships where they're basically not having to pay for anything. So you've got and I could go on and on and on and on about the number of fake hate crimes that we've had in just the last 3 or 4 years. But because we have so many known fake hate crimes, you would know if there was a real one, because every teeny little thing that happens to a black person in this country becomes international news. So if there was real cases of real hate crimes against black people, you would know about it because they would also generate international sensation. And then we would find out, oh my God, that really happened. Holy crap. It's just the problem is that every time that happens, it's, oh, wow, that's obviously fake. And then it's found out to be obviously fake. You can extend out onto that, fake hate crimes against Muslims, and then extend out onto that fake hate crimes against women. And minorities. There's over and over and over again, we see that there is really no supply of hate crimes in America against minority groups. Because if there was, we would know about it, because every perceived tiny slight or fabricated slight against minority in this country becomes a national media sensation. So the problem with that, though, is that there is only one cohort of interracial violence that does occur with significant volume. And the problem for the narrative is that it's actually black perpetrators attacking white victims. That is the only interaction with any significant volume in this country that constitutes interracial violence. There's a lot of intra-racial violence, and I'll get into that as well here. But obviously, black on black crime is out of control. But there is not any noticeably statistically significant volume of white attacking black. There's a huge volume of blacks attacking whites, Asians, etc. But there just is not that interracial violence occurring in any significance the other way back. And then you expand that out to other minorities, and it's just not there. It just does not exist. Yet, what do we hear? We hear from the President of the United States and the Attorney General that, and then the Director of the FBI, white nationalism and white supremacy, that's the leading threat of terror to the American people this decade. It's it's all this white supremacists. Well, the problem is that there just isn't enough white supremacists to fuel that narrative. There's plenty of low-level black supremacists that feel justified in doing what Jesse did. Jesse, I would say, is a black supremacist. He has created this racial narrative. Now, he didn't go out and shoot white people, but he certainly crafted a narrative in a way that was designed to propagandize the country against white people, against conservatives, and to say, oh, well, this goes into the narrative of white people are oppressing black people, which just isn't true anymore. It might have been at one point in time. It certainly was you go back far enough, but at this point, it's just not true. And you've got a lot of black supremacists on the left and their allies in the Democrat Party trying to create this narrative that blacks are being victimized by white people, and the only solution to that is to have the government, the full force of the FBI and the DOJ come down on your head and to start abducting parents who are just going to school board meetings. Part of, that's another big thing that this plays into. It all plays into this narrative fabric. There's a narrative fabric in America right now, and there has been for a long time. It's kind of like imagine like a tapestry. Like you keep kind of working, weaving the string into the tapestry, and you're building this narrative fabric, and it goes through time. And Jesse's got a little string, he's got a little pattern way back in the fabric that looks like a hate crime, that it looks like a point in time where whites were attacking a black person and that it was wrong. And it's really hard to unthread that tapestry and get that pattern out of there. So it's kind of stuck in there. It's stuck in a lot of people's minds. Even after this verdict came out, you can rest assured that there's plenty of leftists that will never even hear. They will never even hear that Jesse was found guilty of this. They probably didn't even know that there was a trial going on. Because that's the kind of people that we've got on the left. Certainly within the black community, you're probably gonna have that same kind of ignorance of what really happened. And so you've got this false thing that happened stuck in that narrative tapestry of American history right now, the current narrative of white supremacy. And that leads into, you got 3 years of that. Just off this one case here. And now all of a sudden you've got the FBI targeting parents at school board meetings because their parents say, hey, maybe I don't want my child taught that blacks are inferior and need a forced hand up with critical race theory, and they need to be held to different standards of law, and they need to be taught different math because they think differently, because that's what critical race theory is. And so now you've got the FBI saying, oh, well, we're going to target those parents as white supremacist terrorists because they don't want their kids being taught CRT. Well, how do you get there? Well, you get there step by step, and one of those steps was Jesse's fake story. And a lot of those other steps that got you there were also fake stories. A lot of the other steps that got you there were fake stories as well. And so you have, and this is creating this false reality. And so we're never going to be able to catch up. We'll never be able to debunk it fast enough because the left owns the institutions weaving that tapestry. The mainstream media, for as much as alternative media has grown in the last 5 years, it's not grown enough. It's not grown fast enough. And you still have the mainstream media, and along with the social media censorship, ensuring that all of these fake hate crimes get woven into the narrative, and that it's really, really hard to debunk them in real time because you're getting throttled on social media. And you're never going to be able to weave as much into the narrative as all of the dozens of establishment media empires. And then by the time you get to the point where, the courts have finally settled this, like, oh yeah, it was fake. It was a false hate crime, which is actually surprising that this even went to trial. Most of the fake hate crimes just, oops, my bad. And there's never any consequences for the person. So you've got us continuously battling that. And maybe someday, maybe within the next 5 years, maybe in the next decade, alternative media will have grown to the point where we can be weaving narrative as fast as they are, as fast as they're weaving false narrative. But as it stands right now, we're always going to be playing catch up. And that catch up has compounding effects because you've got incidents that compounded on the false incident of Jesse Smollett. You've got other quote unquote racialized incidents, and the left will justify it by saying, it's justified that BLM was burning stuff down or that they're looting. Of course they're angry. Look at what happened to Jesse. And so you've got this compounding effect where new events are being predicated on this old event. And by the time you find out that it's fake, this new event becomes the predicate for another new event and a newer event. And so you'll never be able to catch up to it until we get much larger alternative media. But with social media platforms throttling stuff like that, I don't know what that treadmill, I don't know if we ever catch up on that treadmill is the problem there. Just a second here. All right. The other thing that's interesting about this is, and I said this the last time that we talked about a hoax hate crime. Jesse is actually participating in very classic black on black crime. So unfortunately, and for a variety of reasons, the only significant cohort of interracial violence in America is black on white violence. And then the only significant cohort of intra-racial violence is black on black crime. There is no comparison between the white on white crime numbers or the Asian on Asian crime numbers or the Mexican on Mexican crime numbers. They don't even come close, even if you add all of them together, to black on black crime. And normally you think of black on black crime as some kind of like gang violence in the streets of Chicago, right? Well, I would like to posit, and I've done this before, that black on black crime can also include psychological violence, like what Jesse's done. Jesse has, and hoax hate crimes, especially hoax black hate crimes, what those do is it creates this psychological fear in other black people. A gang member shoots up someone's house. Maybe they kill two or three people. Someone like Jesse does a hoax hate crime, and he can scare millions of black people all at once. That's what hoax hate crimes do. It's especially if it's a black person creating a hoax hate crime against themselves, they are creating fear in the minds of other black people, and it's a unfounded fear. I'm sure there was a lot of black people that saw what happened to Jesse, and they thought, oh my God, he was just walking around Chicago and he got jumped just because he was black. Oh my God, that could happen to me. That could happen to my kids. That's terrifying. I know seeing some of the stories about what Antifa does for racial reasons and jumping people because they're wearing a political slogan or because of their skin color. Some of that scares me. Is it terrifying? Is it keeping me up at night? Not really, because I don't really live in one of those areas where I got to worry about that. But it does make you stop and think. And but what Jesse's doing is he's doing that for millions of black people. Every hoax hate crime. That's what Bubba did. That's what the girl at the college did. And I could go on and on and on. They all create this low-level fear in black people, but they're able to target it at millions of them all at the same time, being boosted by the media. Their violent act being boosted by the media. It's interesting because the left would usually talk about stuff like that. It's like, oh, well, it's a microaggression. White people have microaggressions against black people that, cause them this low-level anxiety at all times. And it's difficult for them to live with this low-level anxiety. And you add up all the little low-level anxiety attacks all throughout the day, and black people are in constant high levels of anxiety. That would be a typical leftist argument. And I'm positing that, to an extent, that could be true, except for the real microaggression would be Jesse creating this undue fear in black people that just by walking on the streets, they're in fear of being jumped because of the color of their skin. Now, they might be in danger of being shot by somebody else with the same skin color as them, but they're probably unlikely to be jumped for the color of their skin by white people. That seems pretty unlikely. And as I said before, based on the statistics, it's statistically zero. It's statistically zero chance that that's going to happen. But for millions of black people, Jesse had created that low-level anxiety in them that they could get jumped. And so I posit that hoax hate crimes like Jesse's, that is typical black on black crime. And that is typical black on black terror. As gangs tend to terrorize within their own community, Jesse has done so as well, and has essentially created this terror attack on black people by psychologically infecting them with the idea that they need to be at all times hyper vigilant around white people, that they could get jumped. And that feeds into their politics too. Doing that also lays fertile ground for someone like a Joe Biden or a Kamala Harris to come up and say, hey, black people, I know you're scared. I know you're scared because our buddy Jesse Smollett tried to scare you. But if you want your fear to be satiated, we can help. So vote for us. And Democrats are able to exploit that fear. That's why the media always bullhorns these hoax hate crimes, because keeping black people scared keeps it so that Democrats have a way of telling them, hey, we're the solution. We know you're scared. You have a right to be scared, and we can protect you. But it's not true. It's just none of it's true. All right. I could go on and on and on about that, I am sure. But instead, I'm going to go on to the next story, which is about... So the Supreme Court this week, they ruled that there would be much wailing and gnashing of teeth for leftists. The case that they were hearing on Friday was pertaining to the Texas law that banned abortion for children with a fetal heartbeat and allows people to sue abortion providers who murder babies. The Supreme Court ruled that the Texas law would remain in effect, but that abortion providers will have standing to sue this law in the future. So basically, Texas put out a law almost 2 months ago at this point, that it was a heartbeat bill, which is pretty common now. If there's a heartbeat detected, you can't kill it. And then anybody has standing to civilly sue abortion providers for providing an abortion. It doesn't have to be the mother or the father or even a family member. It could just be anybody who's aware of the situation is allowed to sue any abortion provider civilly. This was a very elegantly crafted law that was designed to create as much havoc for someone like a Planned Parenthood as possible, while also being so ethereal as to not actually create anything that went against the current understanding of Roe v. Wade. So it was very well crafted. A lot of people were actually upset at how well crafted it was because it was well crafted, it didn't hit very hard, right? They wanted to say, we want a hard ban on abortions and we want to execute all current abortion providers effective immediately. A lot of people wanted something like that. But this law was smartly crafted that actually got passed, whereas a lot of these more aggressive versions of the law, one, they never end up getting passed because Congress people, even at the state level, are all cowards and they don't actually want to, put their name on something that would actually be effective, right? So a lot of those, they're great for the activist community, but they never go anywhere. And this was, for the first time in a while, something significant that targeted Planned Parenthood in a way that was legally clever enough to not disrupt any of the fabric of Roe v. Wade or any of the, not bumping into any other medical laws, etc., and also created maximum havoc for Planned Parenthood in that they are now allowed to be sued and they would have to be pumping money into these lawsuits to defend themselves. It doesn't even say that it's illegal or that a judge in a lawsuit like this, a judge should rule in favor of one or the other. It just merely opens them up to litigation. It didn't even say that it was illegal for them to be providing the abortions so long as there wasn't a fetal heartbeat detected. It just said that they're allowed to be sued. So if they had even gone further than that and said, oh, this is specifically illegal and it's going to be enforced by, civilian police, etc., it probably would have gotten struck down rather quickly. And so what's interesting is somebody who didn't have standing immediately sued the state of Texas over this law, saying, you can't do this to us. And so it went up to the Supreme Court level, and the Supreme Court basically made a non-decision, which in this case is actually good because it means that the law stands. So long as the Supreme Court doesn't really have a firm stance one way or the other, then the law is allowed to stand. And so the Texas law will remain in effect. And basically the Supreme Court said, well, we're going to let the law stay, but if somebody has a problem with it in the future, they are allowed to sue the state of Texas over it again, which is kind of funny because the whole reason why this was even at the Supreme Court in the first place is because somebody sued the state of Texas over this law. So basically it was actually kind of a little bit not as good as I think people were hoping. Yes, it was good that the law remained in effect, but the Supreme Court saying, well, somebody in the future is allowed to sue about this again, and maybe we'll review it in the future if it comes back up through the Supreme Court, is basically, I think the Supreme Court, what the judges or what the justices thought was the person who sued Texas this time, they didn't really have a very good case, but we think that in the future, somebody could have a better case. And so we're going to allow them another bite at the apple in the future if somebody can come up with a better case, a better reason why we should strike this law down. We're not just going to put it to bed now. We'll hang a lantern on it and we'll allow it to be addressed in the future if somebody can come up with a better reason why we should strike it down. So in the short term, great. In the long term, it's a little bit of a mixed bag decision there. The Supreme Court also is hearing a separate case this week and last week, which is Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. This case is out of Mississippi, and it specifically seeks to overturn Roe versus Wade. Again, the Texas one, because it was so clever, it didn't really bump up against Roe versus Wade. However, this Mississippi one does specifically go up against Roe versus Wade. The original R v. Wade decision did not create a right to abortion, though many idiot leftists will tell you that it did. Roe v. Wade merely ruled that the states were restricted from regulating abortions in the first and second trimester of a pregnancy. So it didn't create a right to abortion. It just restricted states from saying that it wasn't a right in the first and second trimester. Interesting that it's something that's not even in the Constitution. The Democrats have so fervently defended the right to not have their abortion rights infringed by the state in the first and second trimester. However, certain other constitutional amendments which reference not infringing things, those are apparently less important in their eyes. Let's see here. A little bit of, not by no means is anybody in Direwolf Media a legal expert, and the Roe v. Wade decision has long been kind of castigated as how should I put this? Doesn't make sense. A lot of the legal justifications for Roe v. Wade are very thin. There was the famous mention of penumbras, that there are certain laws which cast penumbras onto other rights in the Constitution, and that within those penumbras there are these kind of second level or second generation rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. You can't see them. If you don't know what a penumbra is, it's typically when the moon has a solar eclipse, and there's a spot under the eclipse where there is the dark shadow, where the sun is totally out. And then there is a wider shadow called the penumbra, which is it's kind of like a shadow's shadow. It's not as dark as the main shadow, but it's much wider. It's kind of a shadow's shadow is what the penumbra is. And so it's funny that the original Roe v. Wade decision referenced these penumbras in the law, that it's a shadow's shadow of the original Constitution. And if you look at the shadow of the shadow, all of a sudden, all these new rights to murder babies just poof into existence. It's very, very fascinating. And the main constitutional amendment, if you look at its shadow, was the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment reads as follows. Again, this was one of the main amendments cited by the Roe v. Wade decision originally. The 14th Amendment reads, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside." That's nice. "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws." The key part being there that no state shall abridge the privileges of citizens to deprive them of, no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. That's kind of the core of the 14th Amendment. So, no state shall deprive a person of life. If you look at the shadow of that, and then you look at the shadow of that shadow, all of a sudden, the right of a mother to commit infanticide poofs into existence. So that is the origin of the Roe v. Wade decision. Now that I'm explaining it like that, maybe you can kind of understand why a lot of legal scholars found this rather flimsy. And I think the famous RGB or RBG, I can't remember. I always confuse her with the lighting sequence. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, yeah, RBG. She actually had famously mentioned that Roe v. Wade was a bad decision in that it was very flimsily backed, that it was not a judicially rigorous decision. She was happy with the outcome, and she thought that there was many ways that they could have had a better outcome or a more robust decision. But even she agreed that the Roe v. Wade decision was a bad judicial decision. And why was it a bad judicial decision? Well, because of what I just said. The Supreme Court, in their opinion section, and when the Supreme Court makes a decision, they'll write an opinion section kind of explaining why they thought what they thought. And in their opinion section for the Roe v. Wade decision, they said that it was a penumbra, that they found this right to privacy to privately kill your child in the penumbra of the 14th Amendment. And what's a penumbra? It's a shadow of a shadow. So if you, again, reading the text of the 14th Amendment, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. So if you look at the shadow of that, which I don't know how you take a shadow of a law, and then you look at the shadow again, a level 2 shadow, then all of a sudden you find within that you do have the right to deprive any person of their life, so long as that person is not a person as defined by you, and the person depriving them of their life is their mother. So now you can see why that's a shaky decision. So we will see what happens, possibly next week, though I would be surprised if the Supreme Court's actually still hearing stuff next week, given that the holidays are coming up. So this might actually get put on the back burner for a month or two. But so far as I know, it is still on the docket, and they're still hearing arguments about it. Again, this would be Mississippi Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. And this decision would actually specifically go up against Roe v. Wade. And so basically it's putting Roe v. Wade on trial that as long as the person's argument is better than the R v. Wade argument, which I just told you how flimsy it was, the Supreme Court really would have no choice but to break it and overturn that decision, which would immediately create much gnashing of teeth and wailing for leftists. So we'll keep an eye on that and see what happens with that. But that is abortion in the United States this week. This week in abortion. That'll be a segment. Alrighty. So our next story, after I take a drink here. Triumvirate says, and I'm going to modify this slightly. Triumvirate says, stare into the void, and the void gives you the right to murder babies. Nope, I did not have to change that at all because you wrote it the way I thought I wanted to say it. So good job. Thank you, Triumvirate. Alrighty. Our next story is Biden is sleeping on Russia, and that might actually be a good thing. So to start us off with a little context here, in a place that you can't identify on a map, some people that you've never met did some things that don't really affect you to other people that don't really care about you or even speak a language that you've ever heard before. So naturally, neocon warhawks in both parties would like to spend a few billion of your tax dollars and kill a few thousand troops so that they can tell you that they fixed something that you probably don't care about. And for that reason only, we are going to cover this story. Not because anybody at Direwolf Media particularly gives a fuck about the Ukraine, but because of the lies being told about it and the tangible tax dollars and soldier lives that our elites would like to spend on this pointless endeavor. Some of the people that are doing something is Russia, who have been amassing 170,000 troops and a great deal of military hardware on their border with the Ukraine. The U.S. intelligence sources say U.S. intelligence sources say. These are the same U.S. intelligence sources that say that border security is racist, which is why we don't do things like that here in America. And they have reported that they expect Russia to invade the Ukraine soon. And as you know, American intelligence sources have never been mistaken when they are talking about two foreign adversaries doing something that might require a U.S. military response. They've never screwed that up even once, ever. Or wait a second, maybe I got that wrong. Maybe they've never gotten it right even once. It's one or the other. I can't remember which. It's one or the other. You guys might have to look that one up. All right. Let's see here. So they said that they expect American intelligence says that they expect Russia to invade the Ukraine soon and possibly make good on Putin's promise to one day reunite the Soviet Union of States. Biden has responded by taking a nap, having an ice cream cone, and then Mark Milley and Lloyd Austin began moving additional American military assets into Europe as a bluffing show of force. Joe Biden's teleprompter then met with Putin via phone call. While the phone call was supposed to be a secret, the Kremlin, well known for their transparency, released part of the phone call showing Biden's not-so-intimidating approach, which, to be honest, is not that big of a deal. While I would much rather the U.S. show indifference about the Ukraine rather than weakness, the last thing I want for us is to show aggression towards Russia. After 20 years trillions of dollars and thousands of barrels of blood from the Strategic Patriot Reserve, amounting to a total collapse of Afghanistan over the course of a day and a night, the American people just do not have the stomach for war with Russia over a country that we can't even Google without getting spell checked. And by, quote, not having the stomach for it, I mean it's really hard. What I mean to say is that it's really hard for us to keep food down when half our continent is irradiated from nuclear fallout from Russian cruise missiles. Like the establishment Dems, the neocon Republicans are also thirsty for blood, with some suggesting options as light as sanctions against Russia, and others suggesting that Biden consider a first strike nuclear attack against Russia, because that's rational in 2021. Some people in Congress have suggested, some people in just commentary spaces and in the news have suggested that Putin is just securing his borders against possible NATO aggression. That doesn't really hold water, as NATO isn't really in an aggressive stance right now. Even if the U.S. interests wanted to use NATO for war with Russia, I really just don't see our NATO partners in Europe signing off on that. So, it is an interesting theory that Putin wants to invade Europe ultimately. I'm just not seeing that hold water. The theory that Putin is concerned that NATO will invade Russia, I just don't see that as a possibility. I really don't. And Putin would know that. He's not Putin takes stuff seriously. Bad dude, bad evil guy, does bad stuff. But to say that Putin does not take stuff seriously, that Putin does not play to win, that Putin is not taken in by the mainstream media narrative and the leftist gobbledygook that comes out of it, that would just be a lie. Putin sees through stuff like that, and he calls it out, and he operates in reality. And I don't see Putin looking at NATO and thinking, wow, they're going to invade Russia next year. I really just don't see him saying that, because I really just don't see it as a possibility. It's just not the reality that we live in. While America does contribute the most troops and the most resources to NATO, we still have that in a rather even delegation of powers between our member nations. And I really don't see the rest of our European allies in NATO saying, yeah, we just feel like for no reason invading Russia. You've got half of those allies are buying Russian oil and natural gas right now. So I really just don't see, and even if they wanted to, I don't see the EU letting them sign off on that. It's just not a realistic thing that's going to happen. Other people have suggested that Putin is planning on reunifying the Soviet Union and invading Europe. So kind of the opposite stance, that maybe Putin's worried, maybe Putin's doing this because he's worried NATO's going to invade Russia. And then some people are saying, well, maybe Putin's doing this because he wants to invade the EU. And while he might be trying to reunify the Soviet Union, I have no doubt about that. I'm sure as a former KGB officer, there is a small single tear that rolls down Putin's eyes every time single eye, every time he thinks about the former Soviet Union. I'm sure that was very important to him, as evil as it may have been. So I definitely think it's possible and likely that he's trying to reunify the Soviet Union. But the idea that he would be planning an invasion of the EU at any point in like the distant future, I don't see any rational basis for that or any benefit to be gained from it. Now, that's not to say that Putin's not an evil guy, but he's also a literal cutthroat businessman. Right now, the EU countries Europe is buying energy from Russia very, very lucratively, I might add. Now, Russia doesn't have a lot of other things to offer the world, but they get a lot. That actually is a stroke in Europe's favor, is that Russia gets their other stuff that are not energy from Europe, from European manufacturing and from the European economy. So the idea that Putin is going to invade the EU, blowing up these energy sales deals, and then depriving his economy of any source of incoming finished goods. I'm not seeing that as a strategy that benefits Putin in any way, and does not benefit the creation of the Soviet Union. He would really have to whole scale, like Nazi style, take over the continent, which maybe, but I don't, as opposed to the way Germany was set up at the beginning of World War II and the way that Russia's set up now. I'm just not seeing, I don't know, maybe I'm reaching a little outside my depth here, but I'm just not seeing Russia being able to conduct a large-scale invasion of the European continent and then kind of restart its economy quick enough to then support the motherland. I'm just not seeing that as a viable strategy. Maybe Putin's got it all figured out and I'm just an idiot, but I'm really not seeing this narrative of, oh, Putin's going to invade Europe. If Biden doesn't do something in the Ukraine now, next year, Brussels will be speaking Soviet. I don't know what language Russians probably speak Russian, don't they? That one got away from me. So this, again, the two theories that Putin is going to invade Ukraine because he's worried that NATO will invade Russia, that doesn't really make sense to me. I don't think it holds a lot of water. The other theory that Putin's going to invade the Ukraine as kind of a opening salvo to invading the rest of Europe, that one doesn't really hold water either. Now, the idea that he's invading the Ukraine because he would like to reunify the Soviet Union, and also kind of a lesser reported fact, is that there's actually a lot of Ukrainians that were former Soviet Union citizens that would like to go back to the Soviet Union. That they're not really happy with the way Ukraine's running stuff. And one of the reasons why Ukraine's even in a state of play right now is because there is a separatist group within Ukraine that I don't know a lot about, so I'm not going to speak necessarily to their morality of it. But from my understanding, they are Soviet separatists that would like to break off from the Ukraine and rejoin Mother Russia. So this whole idea that this thing is going to be any further than the Ukraine is, I don't know, it's not holding water. Now, I know that there's supposedly a lot of quote-unquote very smart people, very, very smart people in the U.S. intelligence agencies that are very assured that this is going to go further, that, Putin's doing this because he's scared NATO's going to invade, or, he's planning to invade Europe. And there's a lot of, very, very smart people, much smarter than you, very smart people on television telling you this as well, that this is a prelude to Russia invading Europe. But we've seen this movie before. We just saw the 20th sequel to WMDs in Iraq when Afghanistan fell a couple of months ago. Yes, I know that Iraq and Afghanistan were separate issues, but they were predicated on a nearly similar thing, a nearly identical thing there. So I color me skeptical that Russia is planning on to invade the EU. And even if let's say that Fox is an idiot. Let's say that Fox is an idiot, and next 4th of July, Brussels is speaking Russian. Everybody in Europe is now a Russian, the second great and bountiful Soviet Union, the USSR too. Let's say I'm a big idiot, and next 6 months, EU's the EUSSR. I don't care. If Russia is planning on invading Europe, that's there's a lot of countries in Europe. They have a entire political overstate apparatus. The EU was, within the last couple of years, is trying to bootstrap their own military. Each of their member countries, most of their member countries, have their own militaries. That's who's supplying troops to NATO. If Russia's planning on invading the EU, that's kind of an EU problem. I know that's a little bit isolationist, but we've certainly helped out Europe with getting invaded on a continent-wide scale at least 2 times in the last 100 years. This would mark the 3rd time in 100 years. Actually, no, we just passed over. Okay, well, they could have this one. We've only done it twice in the last 100 years, so this would be. We've only done it once in the last 100 years, actually, because we went far enough into the future that we're over 100 years ago was the First World War. So, okay, maybe they can have one. They can have 2 per 100 years. So I don't know if they want to use it up this quickly, but I guess if the EU wants help from the US again for getting a continent-wide invasion, we might be willing just because they've passed over, that expiration period from the last World War. So maybe. But I really see this, again, back to seriousness. I see this as an issue for Europe to deal with. If Europe would like help in dealing with this, they are more than welcome to ask. But as of right now, it appears the EU is more than happy to initiate trade relations with Russia. You've got Germany, who is paying nothing into NATO again. They paid a little bit into NATO for a couple of years when Trump yelled at Merkel. But the whole point of NATO is supposedly to prevent the Soviet Union and then transferred onto Russia, was to prevent the Soviet Union from invading Europe after the Second World War. And that mission got transposed onto Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed. And I definitely see the usefulness of it and the possibility that the Soviet Union was going to invade Russia or invade Europe at the end of the World War. But that was 80 years ago. That's not now. That was a while ago. And so I think that and it's been long discussed too that possibly NATO has outlived its mission usefulness. But again, if the allies in Europe would like assistance from the U.S. in preventing Russia from invading Europe, we're here. We are here, willing and able, if they are requesting it. We even have a pre-existing alliance in NATO that gives us a mechanism for assisting our allies in Europe to prevent an invasion from Russia. But again, I'm not seeing this fear from Russia or from Europe. I'm not seeing this European fear that they'll be speaking Russian next year or probably sprechen Russian next year. I just see them instituting trade deals. America continuing to bankroll their national defense against nothing. And then now we've got this Ukraine situation where, okay, if Russia wants Ukraine, I don't really see how that has anything to do with us. We've got one story we'll cover here in a bit is inflation is at something like 32%. They'll report it at 7%, but real inflation's at closer to 32%. I just don't see how we're doing purges in our military on ideological grounds. The Secretary of Defense and the chair of the Joint Chiefs just sacrificed $100 billion of American military assets in Afghanistan, or maybe it was 100 billion. Yeah, it was 100 billion of American military assets, just abandoning dozens of planes and hundreds of Humvees to the Taliban. There was a story that Ladder Crowder broke last week about the CIA and the Pentagon having prolific amounts of child pornography on their government computers. That's a story I might cover next week. Is Pentagon. Lots of apparently an unbelievable, a quote unbelievable amount of child porn on Pentagon computers. Isn't that crazy? So I would say that there's at least a couple of problems here at home, and I don't think, and I know that this has happened in the past, and it's kind of a kind of a trope even, that weak leaders with lots of problems at home, they'll want to get into wars to distract you. And I'm really not seeing, if we wanted to get into a war with somebody, I don't know if, I don't think Russia is my first option here. I mean, and there's some little African nation we can go topple over. Maybe we can go poke at one of the Astans in the Middle East again. If we want to have a war of distraction, I mean, maybe go at a little bit of a, lesser player than Russia, certainly. So this some of this story kind of came to a head towards the end of the week, which I'll get to in a second. But let's talk about the Ukraine in general here. We talked a lot about Europe and Russia and American interests, but what about Ukraine? Do we really care about what's happening to Ukraine if Russia takes over a section of land with a bunch of people living in it that would rather live under Russian rule anyways? Is that really a big deal for us? I would say that at best I'm indifferent to what happens to the Ukraine. But I also think it's important to remember that Ukraine colluded with former Vice President Joe Biden in protecting Hunter and Joe's financial crimes as a part of his role in Burisma. Everyone looks at the Burisma story from the perspective of Joe Biden withholding aid from poor old Ukrainians in exchange for firing a prosecutor that was going after Hunter. But a different way to look at that is the Ukrainian government took $1 billion of your tax dollars, $1 billion tax dollars, as payment for assisting Joe Biden commit fraud on a mammoth level. And now Ukraine is getting their just desserts, because the end of the story, the most recent development at the end of the week here, was that it is expected that Joe Biden will now, as a resolution to this crisis, Joe Biden is expected to suggest to Ukraine that they should cede that territory, just give that land over to the Russians in order to keep this a cold situation and not turn it into a hot war. And to me, that seems like justice, or at least karma, a lot of karma, because it was about 5 years ago, I think 6 years maybe, the Ukrainians took $1 billion of your tax dollars in exchange for protecting the Biden name. And because they did that, because they stole $1 billion of your tax dollars in exchange for protecting the integrity of the Joe Biden name, Joe Biden was able to become president. And now Joe Biden is suggesting that they slice up their country and hand it over to the Russians. I sure hope that $1 billion was worth it for him. I don't see any issue with what's happening in the Ukraine. I don't really see any reason why in particular we should care about it. That's not to say that, I want to see a bunch of Ukrainian people suffering. It's just, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to virtue signal that I care about a bunch of individual Ukrainians that I don't know. There are hundreds of countries all over the world, mostly in the Middle East and Africa, where there are people suffering at the hands of other people. That's what third world nations do. That's what, and Ukraine would be considered a second world nation, which was the Soviet bloc country, or the communist bloc countries. So I that's awful, but I'm not going to pretend that I've got any particular heartfelt dismay for these Ukrainians. It's another group of people that are suffering, and that's awful. That sucks. But does that mean that America needs to get into every single war over every single thing? I mean, unless you're suggesting that America, kind of take over the world as an empire and force people to be nice to each other at the point of a gun, which at this point, I don't really see as that being a solution either, because the American government and leadership is so awfully corrupt, and as bad as a lot of these other third and second world nations. It's just a thing that happens. If you feel so fervently about it, the Ukrainians are putting up a fight. Trump famously was selling them arms. The Biden administration is doing a little bit of the same thing. There is a Ukrainian resistance to the Russian invasion. If you feel so passionately about it, go buy yourself a ticket to Kiev and go. I'm sure they got a gun for you. Maybe you can bring a bullet. Go grab yourself an AK and go fight some Russians if you feel so fervently about it. But I really don't see it as an issue that is affecting America's national security interest. I could see a windy argument, a very zigzaggy argument about it being a European national security issue, but that's a European problem. That's not an us problem. And again, if our allies are asking for help, I'm all for it. We should be helping our allies, and I would hope that they would help us in our time of need, as a lot of them did when we invaded the Middle East. A lot of our NATO allies assisted us with that, and that was very nice of them. If they are having issues with the Russians or they've got security concerns, well, we are here, willing and able. But I don't think that on our own volition, America needs to be sending troops to Ukraine to be shooting at Russians. That's ridiculous. Absolutely not. To the extent that any of our troops would be going over there, they would have to be going over there as a function of NATO. And I would love to see those NATO ally nations like Germany, who is literally suckling at Putin's energy teat right now with a giant pipeline sending them natural gas. Unless nations like that are going to step up, unless those NATO allies like that are going to step up and say, hey, we need your help, we want you to defend us from Russian aggression, I really don't see how that's our game to play. Now, I do see why Biden would want to have something happen, because certainly stuff here at home's not going so well, and he would love a distraction. It's very obvious after the way Afghanistan was handled that Milley and Lloyd Austin, that their goal is to just waste as much U.S. military assets, blood, and treasure as they possibly can to further the bottom line of Raytheon. But I really don't see any compelling security reasons for us to be engaging really in any way with Ukraine. If Ukraine wants to buy weapons from us on the open market, the U.S. government should allow them to do that. I don't see any reason to restrict the free market of that. I really don't see a benefit to us in sending them for free weapons that were financed by the U.S. taxpayer. I don't really see any benefit to us sending U.S. troops there. If Ukraine would like to purchase military advisement on the open market from something like a Blackwater, these contractor groups, that's perfectly fine, and the U.S. government should stand out of the way of that, allow that to happen. But I don't see this urgency of, you've got some Republican politicians saying, first strike nuclear needs to be on the table. That's ridiculous. First strike nuclear to where? Where exactly would we be sending the nuke? Would we be nuking the land in Ukraine where all the Ukrainian separatists are, rendering the land uninhabitable for everybody? Would we be nuking Russia over a border dispute in the Ukraine? Would we just nuke the Ukrainian border and just make it a no man's land so Russia can't invade over top of it? All of which are terrible ideas. So I don't know why, I do know why you've got Democrats eager for something to happen in the Ukraine, because the Democrats are the war hawkiest of all the parties. They'll pretend that they're not, but they've always been the most ready and eager to go to war. The Republican neocons, they always love themselves a good war, and they're hardly distinguishable from the Democrats at this point. You've got the corrupt military officials at the Pentagon eager to kill more soldiers under their command and destroy more military equipment so that we have to repurchase it from Raytheon and Lockheed. That makes sense to me. You got Joe Biden, who, he's there, and, he probably has a thought about this. He might not be able to say it quick enough to get it out of his head before he loses it, but I'm sure he has a thought about this. So I can kind of understand why everybody is saying what they're saying about, why they want us to have some kind of action in the Ukraine. They've all got their motivations, but none of those motivations have anything to do with U.S. security or benefit to the U.S. taxpayer. They all have something to do with corrupt or morally deficient reasons about enjoying war or enjoying wasting money or enjoying, killing more soldiers and possibly risking American mainland getting hit by Russian nukes. This is a situation that could easily pop off into an extreme situation, an extreme World War III situation, but it also has no reason to. There's no reason for it to pop off like that other than just absolute idiocy and corruption and selfishness of our leaders. So if you've been wondering, what is going on in the Ukraine? What is going on in the Ukraine is a bunch of people who like wasting your money and wasting your lives. They would like to continue doing that. And there's no other justification for it other than that. So again, the most recent development on this, and it appears this will be most likely what's moving forward, is that this is not going to end up going hot. The Ukrainian land that is in dispute will be given to Russia. That is the current best prediction by many sources. Could be wrong. This still has the potential to go hot. But I think that's probably the best solution, because I think that there's no reason for this to go hot. I don't see any reason for us to have any opinion on this land one way or the other. And also, I think it's a little bit of karma for the Ukrainian government because of what they did with U.S. politics and what they did for the Joe Biden's family in protecting them and taking $1 billion of your taxpayer dollars in response for that. I think that this is all karma playing out. And I think in 3 months from now, Ukraine will go back to something that you don't ever talk about, nothing in casual conversation. And you'll go back to forgetting how to spell it or where it is on a map or that it's even on the border of Russia. How many people even knew that it was on the border of Russia? Guessing not many. Alrighty. Well, Joe Biden, he's our next story here. Joe Biden is he's facing some issues here. As per our recent discussion here about needing a war of distraction, one of the things that Joe Biden would like us to be distracted from is the economy. And to help distract us from the economy, Joe Biden has asked the corporate media to help lie to the American people and propagandize them about Joe Biden's failing economy. On December 6th, CNN's reliable Unix sources reported that Biden held an off-the-record meeting with corporate news agencies to pressure them into shilling for his regime harder than they already were. Specifically, Biden wanted some better spin on his economic failings. Being the Democrat lapdogs that they are, they did just that. Here's just a few of the headlines. Bloomberg publishing an article titled, "The Biden Economy is Actually Pretty Good." The left-wing Mendy Hassan show said that, quote, Biden's economy is better than it was under Trump. We had from the Washington Post an article titled, "The Biden Economy is Doing Pretty Well." Yeah, wow, I think they kind of copied Bloomberg there a little bit. The Hill reported, quote, or their title was, "The Biden is delivering the fastest economic recovery in history. Why hasn't anyone noticed?" And I think there's another one here too. From the New York Times. How is the economy? Biden sees a boom. Many Americans don't. Well, I'll give you a little hint. If one person thinks one thing about the economy and 350 million people think another thing about the economy, guess who's right? And on and on and on and on and on the mainstream establishment media went, all parroting the exact same Biden administration talking points, that inflation is a good thing, that people have more money than ever, and that average job growth is higher than the average job growth for the previous 4 presidents. Ooh, that's pretty high. That last one is actually a little bit true, but it doesn't really capture the reality of the situation. So I've got up on the screen here a graph, and if you look at the graph, you can see this is a graph of the net change in jobs, per quarter for the last 10 years. So basically, if the graph is at 100, then that means that 100 jobs were added that quarter. If the graph is at negative 5,000, that means that 5,000 jobs were lost that quarter. So this isn't the actual number of jobs, it's just the change, it's the delta, the change in the number of jobs per quarter for the last 10 years. So you can see pretty steady. It starts off at in January of 2011 and it goes through January of 21. So you can see, which we're actually not at January 21 yet, but I guess we're in the current quarter. So you can see that the line's pretty flat, pretty consistent. That there's always a little bit of job growth, just kind of a background radiation level of job growth every quarter. That there's always going to be, just as the economy naturally is growing, there's going to be this consistent increase in the number of jobs at all times. That is what a healthy economy looks like, is just this very steady, not crazy, just low level background increase in the number of jobs at a steady, predictable rate. That's a good economy. Now something happened in 2020, after January of 2020. You see this this big dip. There's a really big dip, and this graph actually kind of looks like a cardioid a heartgram. There we go. A heartbeat monitor thing. I'm sure I had a word in my head that I was going to say, but it just left, just gone. So you see this big dip after January of 2020. What happened in January of 2020? Well, the government forcibly shut down everybody's businesses. That's what happened. And so you see this big spike downwards where we were losing 20,000 jobs per quarter. That was a pretty big deal. And then it kind of came back up towards the end of the year, or towards the middle of the year. And it started coming back up a little bit. And then it spiked way back up because basically everybody said we're done with the lockdowns and we're opening stuff back up. And then all of a sudden you get back to this kind of an artificial increase in the number of jobs being added just because you had so many jobs removed the previous quarter. Now you've got this jobs being added, and then it kind of goes back down closer to that low level job growth. So You'll notice that the spike downwards went down to negative 20,000. So we were losing 20,000 jobs per quarter, which I think that this is, I think that these are like in millions. Let me see here. Is there like a scale on this? Because 20,000 doesn't seem like nearly enough. I'm guessing this is like in thousands, so it's probably 20,000 thousand. I'm guessing it's probably like something like that. I don't know. I probably should know that since we put this graph in the thing. But anyways, yeah, it is in thousands. Okay, yeah, so this graph is in thousands. It says series title, all employees, thousands of total non-farm seasonally adjusted. So when it goes down to 20,000, it's actually 20,000, which I think is 20 million. I'm sure somebody in chat will tell me if I'm wrong. So we're losing 20 million jobs per quarter at the beginning of 2020. And then towards the end of 2020, we were adding almost 10 million jobs per quarter for the next two. So if you've got 2 quarters at the beginning of 2020 where you're losing 20 million jobs apiece, that means that you lost 40 million jobs in 6 months. Then when it flips back up to adding 10 million jobs for the second 2 quarters, you've now added back 20 million jobs in 6 months. Now, if you've lost 40 million jobs and you added back 20 million jobs, how many jobs did you add to the economy that year? Negative 20 million. Yeah, that's how math works. And so after we have that big spike upward at the end of 2020, we go into 2021, and you can see that the level of job growth is higher. It's higher than that previous job growth that we saw from the rest of the decade, but it's not high enough to make up for that giant spike downwards. And so Joe Biden and the media are trying to claim, the number of jobs being added per quarter is higher under Biden than at any point in the last 4 presidencies. Now that sounds impressive, but when you put it in perspective like this, where, well, yeah, I would expect it to be higher because the job loss, and yes, it was under Trump, but the job loss under COVID was so severe, we still have not bounced all the way back. So there is still this deficit in the economy of jobs that were lost under COVID that still have not bounced all the way back. We're still not back to where we were in February of 2020 back at kind of like a 0 point. We still haven't come all the way back. We have not recovered back to the ground that we've lost so far. We lost so much ground, we have not caught back up yet. So, yeah, I expect Joe Biden's, it's not just an expectation, it's a necessity that Joe Biden's job ads per month be way higher than the decade average, because they've got a lot of ground to make up. But they're trying to say, oh, out of context, we're doing better than the last 3 presidents. Well, no, you have to get back to where we were. You have to be doing better than the last 4 presidents just to make up the ground that we lost under the COVID pandemic. So it's not really as impressive as what he's saying. It would be much more impressive if it was, sustainably higher, and it would be impressive if any of the job ad backs could be directly related to Joe Biden policies, which they cannot. In fact, you can directly relate to his policies. A lot of reasons why the job growth rate is not higher than what it is right now. So this is kind of a fabricated falsehood. This is one of those things where it's been described that Joe Biden will often run out in front of a parade holding a baton and then act as though he's leading the parade. It's something that's pre-existing, a pre-existing excitement event. And then Joe Biden runs out in front of it and says, hey, look at me, I'm leading the parade. So you have this natural rebound of the economy after it was restricted so severely that we were losing 20 million jobs per quarter. And then the economy is going to naturally try to rebound. And Joe Biden just ran out in front of that parade, that natural rebound, and said, hey, I did that. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. All right. So let's see here. So you've also got an inflation problem. So Joe Schwartz for The Intercept had, and there's been many articles that kind of reflect this, but the one that we're reading a little excerpt of, or at least a summary of, is from The Intercept. And they say that inflation is actually good for you. So there's this whole idea now, because of inflation being absolutely out of control, that, well, inflation being out of control is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, which, kind of begs the question of, well, how come for like the last 50 years you guys kept inflation low? Were you artificially hurting the American people? Were you lying then, or are you lying now? And why should we believe you at any point? So the Intercept says, or I'll see here, John Schwartz from The Intercept says that inflation is really a problem for the rich, but it's actually a benefit for poor people who have their debt reduced in actual value. This is insanely stupid. So the idea is that if you took out a loan for $1,000, and let's say inflation was 100%, so a dollar, or something that cost $1 today, it costs $2 next year. So that'd be 100% inflation. Well, if you took out a loan for $1 this year, well, next year, you've only got to pay back $1, but the thing that you bought, now it's worth $2. So let's say you took out let's say you're buying an apple. An apple's $1 this year, it's $2 next year. You take out a loan of $1 so you can buy your apple. You buy your apple. And then next year, when you go to pay back the loan, well, hey, you only got to pay back $1, but that apple's worth $2 now. Well, that's great if you're trading stocks and equities and real estate and stuff like that. But for regular people who don't live their lives like that, trading things like that, typically when you're going into debt as a poor person, you're not going into debt because you're buying like durable assets. Now, a lot of people will end up having, their house, their mortgage as their primary thing, but that doesn't really count because you've got equity offsetting it. When I'm thinking of debt, I'm thinking of like your credit card debt, where you bought apples. Apples is not a durable good. It's something you're going to eat or it's going to go bad, etc. So a lot of poor people, they're in debt not because they're buying houses, because that debt's offset by collateral. They're in debt. They're in bad debt that doesn't have collateral for it because they're buying like stuff for their house, or they're eating it, or they're sending their kids to school. They're buying things that are services and consumables, but not things that are assets, not things that you can resell. So maybe you bought that apple with a loan this year for $1, but next year when you got to pay it back, even though that apple's worth $2, you ate it. It's gone. It doesn't actually, like, you can't actually re-extract that value. So yeah, the inflated value of that $1 loan this year, it's in theory less next year, even though it's still really $1 because of inflation. It feels like it's less because everything's more expensive. That would only matter if your paycheck also inflated. So like, let's do a different scenario. Let's say you're making $1 a day, and you wanted to buy an apple, so you took out a loan for another $1, right? 'Cause you're like, well, I don't want to spend all my money. I want to, maybe have a little on the side in case there's an emergency. So I'm going to get out a loan for $1 for this apple, right? And so you buy your apple, and then next year when that loan comes due, you've had 100% inflation again, but this time your wage increased. Now you're getting $2 a day. Ooh, that's exciting. And so now you pay back that loan, and what that loan this year would have cost 1 day's wages. Next year, because of inflation, it only costs half a day's wages. Oh, okay. So now you're understanding how getting debt now before the inflation hits, as long as your wages increase, all of a sudden your work productivity, that loan is actually shrinking, because this year it would have cost a full day's wages to pay back. But next year, as long as your wages increased, now it only costs a half day's wages to pay back. That is, in theory, how you would be reducing the debt load on poor people. So that is what this article is proposing, is that inflation is actually good for poor people because it reduces the value, the labor time equivalent of their debt. That would be a good way of explaining it, is it's not the value, it'd be the labor time equivalent of their debt. So, if their labor time equivalent of debt this year is 100 hours of labor to pay off their loans, next year they might only have to work 50 hours to pay off those loans if their wages increased with inflation. However, wages are sticky. They do not move with inflation hardly at all. They're starting to move a little bit just because of how crazy stuff has gotten with inflation and how the government has been paying people not to work, and that's finally come to an end, thankfully. But you start throwing in cheap labor with 2 million migrants, 2 illegal immigrants per year. All of a sudden, those wages get kicked back down, and your poor people, the only way that inflation helps them with their debt load is if and only if their wages are increasing with the rate of inflation, or at least increasing at all with inflation. If their wages are not really increasing, or they're not employed, they are not receiving any of that work hour equivalent debt. They're not seeing any benefit from that because their wages aren't actually increasing. They're not actually rising with the inflation along with everyone else. You know what is rising? The price of cereal, the price of gas, the price to heat their house. And for poor people, that constitutes basically the majority, if not all of their income, especially if they're in debt. As I said, poor people that are in debt, and again, we're talking about credit card debt, not equity-based debt, like a house or something. Poor people that are in credit card debt, they're in credit card debt because they're buying consumables. Now, I know a lot of people buy stupid stuff. We're going to pretend that poor people are in debt purely because they're trying to buy groceries, right? They're trying to buy bread. So if they're in debt right now because they're buying groceries, then next year when inflation has gone up 30%, maybe they're, well, if their wages aren't going up at the same rate, even if their wages are going up at the same rate, let's say that their wages went up 30% along with the grocery store. Well, now they still don't have any additional money to be putting into their paying off their debts. They're still able to, they're keeping pace with the grocery store. Let's say, so let's do this scenario. A poor person is in debt. They're in credit card debt because they're buying groceries. Inflation 30% next year, and so they're paying 30% more for groceries, but their paycheck went up 30%. They got a 30% cost of living adjustment. Wow. Well, now they're still accruing debt because now they've got the equivalent of buying the same amount of groceries. It's just, it costs more money, but they got more money, but they still don't have any surplus money to be paying off the debts. So they're still actually not paying off their old debts, and they're still incurring new debts. Now, the reality of the situation is far worse than that, right? Because people's wages are sticky. They're not going up 30%. Their grocery bills are going up 30%, but their wages are going up 0, maybe 1 or 2%, but probably closer to 0. So now, all of a sudden, they have this pre-existing debt load from this year because they couldn't afford their groceries this year. And then next year, their groceries are 30% more, but they don't have any more money to buy groceries, or they've got, very little more money to buy groceries. Well, where's that extra money going to come from? It's going to go into more debt. The inflation is far more likely to drive poor people to accrue more debt than it is to help them pay it off. If wages were not so sticky, if wages kept perfect pace with real inflation, this would be an absolutely true statement that yes, inflation helps poor people pay off their debts. But it doesn't, because in reality, that's not how poor people have their money allocated. Now, let's say you're a giant hedge fund, right? Let's say you're a big hedge fund and you see what the housing market was doing this year, and you want to buy yourself some houses because you know that housing prices are going to inflate, let's say 50 to 100% over the next 5 years. Let's say in the next 5 years you think a house is going to double in price. Well, now all of a sudden it makes sense to take out a loan. Let's say you got a $500,000 house that you think is going to be worth $1 million in 5 years. Well, that's pretty easy. You take out a $500,000 loan this year, and then in 5 years you sell that house for $1 million. Now you've got $500,000 to pay back that loan, and you've got $500,000 profit. That makes sense if you're a hedge fund. But if you're a poor person buying apples on a credit card, that it doesn't work like that. You're not. There's a huge difference between buying investment grade assets with credit and then buying consumable goods and services with credit as a poor person. The inflation, and now what I just explained, who do you think inflation helps in that scenario? Well, we just explained how it doesn't really help and it actually really hurts poor people, but it actually not only helps, it really helps rich people. If you are rich enough to be flipping assets like that, if you're rich enough to be financing durable assets and real estate like that, oh, wow, inflation's really great for you. That's actually the whole theory of having 30-year mortgages, is that inflation, if kept at 2% per year, that by the time you get towards the end of your 30-year mortgage, your house should be worth something like 100 to 200% more than what the original mortgage was worth. Now, your mortgage interest rates and your fees and stuff like that are going to be soaking up a lot of that increased equity. But that was kind of the theory, that was the reason why you've got these such long-term loans, is because as you go into the future, as your wages, even the stickiest wages will rise over the course of 30 years. They will. But that's kind of the theory of having these long-term loans. And in fact, if you want to try to benefit the way some of these big hedge funds are, certainly not financial advice, but it would be highly recommended that you refinance your house and throw that mortgage out as far as you can. Throw it out 30 years. If they're offering 35 years or 40 years or 50 years, go for that. Right now, with the way inflation is going and with the way I just described how big hedge funds make money off of real estate by doing that, it is in your interest to throw that mortgage payment as far out into the future as you possibly can, because if inflation's going up 30% this year, how much do you think it's going to go up relative to this year in 30 years? It's going to go up a lot. So that's how maybe middle class people could be making money, or at least minorly benefiting from inflation in one particular category. But in general, even middle class people, you're going to be struggling to keep up with your groceries as the inflation happens, because your wages are sticky. They're not going to keep up. And as a poor person without equity-based assets or equity-based debt loads, if you're renting or leasing your car or renting your housing, you're not benefiting from this. In fact, that rental property, you're going to end up seeing the inflation real quick in your rental payment next year when it goes up substantially. So no, this does not, inflation does not help poor people at all. Not even like the teeniest, littlest, tiniest bit at all. But I guess The Intercept, along with the rest of the mainstream media, would love to trick you into thinking about that, and trick a bunch of poor people struggling to buy groceries into voting Democrat because they think, oh, well, the Democrats are creating inflation, and that's supposed to help me, even though it hasn't yet. And the Republicans, they want to stop inflation, and that would hurt me, even though when inflation wasn't this high, it wasn't hurting so bad. So they're trying to trick people. Don't get tricked. Alrighty. So obviously, very stupid media coverage, especially around the idea of inflation. Let's see here. The polls show that that the economy and inflation are the main issues for every major demographic group. So, who cares about the economy? Black people care about the economy. Mexicans care about the economy. White people care about the economy. Gay, Asian, Latino hybrids care about the economy. Trannies care about the economy. Baseball players care about the economy. Foxes care about the economy. Everybody cares about the economy. Women care about the economy. Men care about the economy. The only people who really don't care about the economy are people who are already rich or controlling the economy. They seem to not have any issue with destroying it. But the rest of us, the voter class, the voter cast of people, we all care about the economy. It's the singular issue uniting everybody, which is great. We can all come together on that. And so it's really important. Now you can see why. If every demographic group cares about the economy, you can see why it's so important for the mainstream media to be controlling that narrative, saying, oh, trying to convince these people, well, the economy is really good. If you're having a bad time in the economy, it's probably just a you issue, but in general, the economy is doing really, really well. And everyone else is doing well. So if you're doing bad in this economy, it's probably just your problem. It's probably just a you issue. You did this to yourself probably. But don't punish Biden because you're having a bad year. No, everybody else is doing well. So we make sure you keep voting Democrat. I'm sure you'll get them next year. So it's really important, if the economy is the best issue for the biggest issue for everybody, that the propaganda be hot, heavy, thick as it possibly can be to make sure that people have those rose-colored glasses on to pretend that the economy is doing really well when they go to the ballot box, because otherwise they're going to pull the lever for someone else. Let's see here. The Democrats know that the economy is the biggest issue for everybody, and they're determined to lie to you as much as they possibly can to get you to believe that the record high inflation, supply chain problems, lower buying power, and higher joblessness is actually a good thing and signs of an improving economy, and that, again, if it's not doing well for you personally, it's just a you issue. But everybody else is doing really, really well. So you just got to make sure that everybody feels isolated and that they're the only problem, but everybody else is doing well. But if we've got a little bit of a spark of hope here. If high prices have got you down, fear not, because the Biden administration has the solution for you poors. Buy a Tesla. That's right. According to Energy Secretary and noted train lover Pete Buttigieg, if your family is struggling with rising gas prices, just buy an electric vehicle and you'll never have to worry about high gas prices again. Because if you're poor, you can definitely afford buying a $75,000 to $95,000 car, and spending several $1,000s to retrofit your garage for an electric vehicle. If you're struggling for an extra 50 cents at the pump, you can probably afford a Tesla. Gosh, these poor people, they're just so dumb. If they were just, if they just stopped being poor and bought a Tesla, they'd be smart like Pete Buttigieg. All right. Our next story is the new Floridian Republic. You thought the new California Republic was something to be, something fearful. Wait till DeSantis. What was it? Gosh, I am so bad at my New Vegas lore. I had a joke, but I lost it because I'm a poser. But the new Florida Republic. Why is DeSantis # DeSantis Gestapo trending on Twitter? Well, on December 3rd, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis proposed to the state Congress that the state should reactivate and fund the state's civil militia. Florida would be joining 23 other states, including California and New York, that also have active state militias that report directly to the governor, not the federal government. A state militia is different from and in addition to the National Guard that operates in each state. Though the National Guard and Air National Guard report to their home states, they are required to follow federal guidance policies, procedures, and authorizations. DeSantis said the militia would be able to provide support in, quote, ways that are not encumbered by federal government, like seceding from the Union. Why does Florida need a militia? If you aren't living in Florida, then you probably shouldn't be worrying about it. However, if it's just out of curiosity, it would probably be for the same reasons that California needs a militia. Florida has been required to deploy their standard police force and request support from other states' police forces to patrol their border thanks to Biden's failed immigration policy. This is just one area where the federal government has created the necessity for states to take control of their own security. The Democrats responded to this story by accusing DeSantis of creating his own personal Nazi SS division. DeSantis, in addition to proposing a militia, well, that is a gross advertisement, has also will be taking some action on the border. So DeSantis from Breitbart, DeSantis will issue emergency order barring state licenses for Florida facilities that house illegal alien children from the Biden border crisis. So they begin. DeSantis' administration through the Florida Department of Children and Families, DCF, will issue what is called an emergency order blocking the issuance or renewal of state licenses to Department of Children and Families facilities throughout the state of Florida if any of those facilities are currently housing illegal migrant children or illegal migrants claiming to be children that the Biden administration has flown into Florida. DeSantis will appear in Jacksonville on Friday morning at a press conference to announce the new order, as well as the government's office conveyed to, and the governor's office conveyed to Breitbart News just how significant of a development this policy represents. Quote, the mission of the Florida Department of Children and Families, DCF, is to protect the health, safety, and well-being of Floridians, especially children, DeSantis spokeswoman Christina Pushaw told Breitbart News on Thursday evening. Quote, to this end, DCF licenses facilities that house children whose families are unable to care for them. And as a state agency, DCF serves the people of Florida, diverting resources away from kids in need in Florida to illegal aliens being smuggled here by the Biden administration for clandestine resettlement does not serve the people of our state. Under the new emergency rule, the federal government's resettlement of illegal aliens, unaccompanied minors from outside Florida, does not constitute evidence of need, as is required for the issuance or renewal of a state license for a child care facility. Therefore, no licenses shall be issued or renewed with respect to any child care agency that provides services to illegal aliens transported to Florida from outside our state. So, this is kind of, obviously, if you guys are hopefully aware, but the kind of quick context on this is that the Biden administration has been directing ICE to take illegal migrants, and instead of sending them back to whence they came, is putting them on planes, trains, boats, automobiles, and buses, and sending them to other states. Florida, notably one of the states that's receiving these clandestine loads of illegal migrants being human transported or human smuggled through the Biden administration. There's been countless stories of planes filled with illegal migrants coming in and landing in Florida at 2 a.m. and unloading hundreds of them, hundreds of illegal immigrants, and just dumping them onto Florida. There's been a kind of clandestine network of nonprofits, mostly funded by George Soros, not a conspiracy theory, that's a fact, that are facilitating this. Joe Biden's federal government is assisting them with this. And it's really just kind of a gigantic human trafficking ring. You've got the human traffickers and the cartels in Mexico. They're kind of the first leg of the journey, getting people from Latin America up through the Mexican border. And then the cartel wing, the cartel wing of the human smuggling network, they pass it off to ICE and to Joe Biden's administration and the DOJ, and they take care of the second leg of the human smuggling operation and bring them to Florida or to wherever. There's all kinds out, mostly red states that are receiving the brunt of this human smuggling operation. But the Joe Biden government is taking a large part of that. They're taking up the whole second leg of that journey. And basically, DeSantis is saying Florida's had enough of this. If Joe Biden wants to use the federal government as a human trafficking network, that's on him. But Florida does not have to abide by that and does not have to allow it to happen. Human trafficking is illegal, and any agency, whether it's state-sponsored, federal-sponsored, or nonprofit, if they're taking part in it, DeSantis is coming for you. Hopefully with that militia. Alrighty, so last story is a little story. Let's see here, little quick update here, and that would be on the Gizlane Maxwell case, which is still ongoing. So it's kind of a very short update. Just a couple of bullets here because it's kind of a complicated case. Not something I've been following particularly closely. I think everybody knows the gist that Gizlane was Jeffrey Epstein, who didn't kill himself, his right-hand woman and rapist in chief, basically, where she was one of the ones helping procure and network the child sex trafficking ring that Epstein was a part of, and that Bill Clinton participated in, and that many other prominent Democrats and Wall Street executives have also participated in. Also, dignitaries from other countries as well. And so Epstein, who didn't kill himself, is unable to stand trial due to his having not killed himself. So Gizlane is kind of the new star of this case, where she is now on trial for kind of the ancillary crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, along with many of the things that she participated in herself. From all accounts, she was as bad as he was, perhaps even a little more so. And so the trial is probably going to take a while, but it's still ongoing. But there was some interesting developments that we wanted to bring to you this week. So one of the things that was theorized but has now been confirmed is that the FBI has been officially, under testimony, been outed as having been aware of Jeffrey Epstein's activities for many years, and they took no action in stopping the child abuse. Now, why might this have happened? Well, it's been reported by many people. Probably first-person report on it would have been Eric Weinstein, who had a story about having encountered Jeffrey Epstein and found the encounter very odd. There's many places where you can find his videos of him describing this encounter. But he said that he was pretty sure that Jeffrey Epstein was some kind of like intelligence agency fabrication, that he was not a real person, and that he was merely kind of a honeypot to pull in people, prominent people in academia and in politics for some kind of nefarious intelligence purposes. Jeffrey Epstein never would talk to him again, but theorized that perhaps he was a CIA asset. There was many other accounts from other people, other independent sources, that perhaps Jeffrey Epstein was some kind of CIA asset, and that whatever Jeffrey Epstein was doing constituted some kind of surveillance or blackmail operation by the CIA, either created by them or piggybacked by them, whatever. But it was said at one point that the FBI was not to go after Jeffrey Epstein because the CIA, he was a CIA asset. And it's kind of a trope in movies and literature is that, the agencies, they're not supposed to interfere with each other's operations. So if, the FBI is investigating what looks like a crime and they find out, oh, this was the CIA, they were doing this, they got to kind of back off because maybe there's some kind of classified secret reason why the CIA was doing that. And they don't want to kind of cross the streams on the agencies there. So basically, it appears to have a lot of circumstantial evidence that Jeffrey Epstein has some kind of intelligence connections. And it was anecdotally stated that the FBI was aware of Epstein but didn't do anything. And that kind of fit with the idea that, well, if Epstein was a CIA asset, that the FBI would not be able to act on any information they had about Epstein. But now we know, confirmed by the trial and testimony and evidence, that the FBI did know that part of the story is confirmed, that the FBI was aware of Epstein and his activities, and that they took no action against him. Now, why would the FBI take no action against him? Again, the other parts of the story are kind of speculative, but the only two reasons why the FBI wouldn't take action after being aware of Epstein's activities is, one, the FBI was involved and implicated, and they were, connoisseurs of what Epstein was offering, which that's certainly possible. Or the FBI hit a wall when they realized that Epstein was attached to the CIA or some other intelligence agency, and that the FBI didn't lack the jurisdiction to do anything about it. It's entirely possible that both things happened, that simultaneously the FBI was unable to do anything to Epstein because he was a CIA asset, and also the FBI is full of a bunch of pedos that enjoyed Epstein's work. That's actually also possible. It could be both, but it's definitely at least one of them. All right. We also had Twitter, a Twitter account providing regular updates on the testimony in the case was shut down by Twitter for no apparent reason. Now, this Twitter account has been the kind of nexus point of much conspiracy theorizing in the last 12 hours, much of which is going on 4chan, and I lack the cultural lexicon of 4chan to really understand what they were talking about. But it was apparently weird that this Twitter account that existed solely to provide updates for the, or allegedly existed solely to provide updates for the Gizlane Maxwell case, is now gone. And now our only source for it is other media, mainstream media that are in the courtroom, I guess, giving us updates. Let's see here. There was no questioning around Epstein's influential clients so far. Many of the victims and witnesses were not called. The prosecution focused solely on the crimes of Maxwell and Epstein. So now some of these people may be called. I'm not sure what stage of the case they're in quite yet. But it seemed like this was going to be an opportunity for a lot of the people and victims that were going to testify against Epstein, that they would be able to be kind of transposed into this case. And it would appear thus far they have not had their chance to say what happened to them in court, which is odd because it was widely reported that Gizlane participated in a lot of the child raping. So I would imagine that at least some of those children are still around to testify against what she did to them specifically. But I don't know, because they're not televising this court session, which is kind of kind of suspect. This is a public trial, so one of the things that kind of came out of the Kyle Rittenhouse case was this interesting phenomenon of having what would have been a normally local court case. Certainly a self-defense incident's pretty major, but it still, had it not been in the context of the culture war or the riots, etc., the Kyle Rittenhouse trial would have been a largely unnoticed local trial in a different time. And because it was televised and because it got so much media attention, we were able to see a lot of interesting things the prosecutors were doing, a lot of prosecutorial misconduct, a lot of the funny business they were doing with the evidence and witness tampering, etc. And it would appear that that sort of stuff goes on pretty regularly, because it seemed like the prosecutors going after Kyle, that they were doing some of these corrupt practices with a lot of fluidic ease, that it wasn't new or novel to them, that they were very comfortable tampering with evidence. They were very comfortable trying to put pressure on witnesses to say what they wanted them to say. And so it was pointed out that if more public trials were televised like that, or had live streams attached to them, that perhaps you could have a more efficient watchdog group kind of looking for these things and pointing them out and calling them out. And so you've got this Maxwell case, this high-profile case, and we're not able to really see what's going on. It's supposed to be a public trial, and we'll be able to look at the transcripts afterwards. We'll be able to look at the transcripts afterwards because they'll be publicly available. But it's different reading a transcript than it is seeing it in person, getting to see what the jury saw. A public trial, again, kind of historically, back when times were simpler and towns were smaller, you really could have a public trial kind of take place in the town square, and everybody in town would have been able to see it and listen to what was going on and see the reactions of people in person. And as towns got bigger and courthouses got nicer, there was some, just physical space requirements that, well, not the entire town can fit inside the courthouse. They're going to have to put some reasonable limitations on this public trial. And, the transcripts will still be available, so it's still a public trial. That's fine. But now that we've kind of, arrived in the future, and there's now this fantastic technology of video where we can live stream this and, recreate that public square that we used to have originally. The original intent of a public trial was to take place in the public square. Now that we can recreate that digitally, and it scales, even though we've got a lot of people in our towns now, we have this thing that can scale the public square. And the public's not supposed to participate in a public trial, but they're supposed to be able to observe it. So a live stream of trials is very much in the principle and intent of a public trial. And so not having the ability to see what's going on there, I think that there needs to be some adapted, and a lot of other people, Arketer Law in particular, who they are a wonderful legal YouTube channel, and they did some excellent coverage of the Kyle Rittenhouse case. They have proposed kind of creating a lobbyist group to lobby Congress to create some kind of federal law that would force courtrooms to be able to have live streaming capabilities, and that we should get more court cases live streamed the way that the Kyle Rittenhouse trial was live streamed. I think that this Gizlane Maxwell case is certainly one of those times where it is of national interest, and we should have the right as the public to see this trial in the way that it was meant to be seen. It wasn't the founders and the framers of our legal system imagined these public trials to take place with public in person. And it's totally understandable that, in-person public trials is just not feasible when you're talking about the volume of even tens of people. You start getting too many people in the courtroom. That's totally understandable. But we now have technology that can overcome those limitations and bring us back to that public square idea of everybody's able to see it with their own two eyes, not just reading these dead transcripts after the fact, but actually being able to see what's going on and see the evidence for yourself, see what the jury saw, see the sweat dripping down the witness's face, to see them stuttering and stammering, to hear the tone of their voice, or to see their voice crack, whatever. That's something that is possible again with modern technology, and it was the original intent of what it was to have a public trial. And the Gizlane Maxwell case, it's kind of a criminal that they are not televising that. That is something that the world should be able to see, and they're not doing it for, well, there's probably a lot of reasons why they're not doing it, but there's that. So let's see here. That is all I got on that one, actually. Let's see here. Oh, there was an I don't know if I talked about this last week, but the prosecutor, the person prosecuting Ghislaine Maxwell is actually James Comey's daughter. And of course it is, because there's only 350 million people in the world. So, there's only 350 million people in this country. So, some of us are going to have to double up on jobs. There's only so many people in the country. So, it makes sense that, James Comey would, his daughter would be the one prosecuting, because, there's only so many people in the world. It's just, that's why there's like the same 100 family names controlling everything in the country. They always, these same 100 names always seem to be involved in everything. And Comey has now added his family name into that, where all of a sudden the Comeys start popping up in these weird places all over the place. Also kind of weird because James Comey's daughter prosecuting Ghislaine Maxwell, who was running the FBI before this happened. That would have been James Comey, who was in the FBI before he was running it. That would have been James Comey. Okay, so who was running the FBI, and who was a big time FBI agent the whole time Epstein was abusing kids and selling them off to foreign and U.S. diplomats and business tycoons. And we now know, again, from the case that we found out this week, that the FBI is verified aware of this happening. What did Comey know, and when did he know it? And is it really the best idea that his daughter is the one prosecuting this case? Is there maybe a little conflict of interest there? I don't know. We'll find out, I guess. Or we won't. But what we do know for sure is that Ghislaine has not yet killed herself. So we have that to be thankful for. All right, guys. Well, that is the show for tonight. I much appreciate you joining me. Had a lot of fun. Good to get back. I will be back next Saturday, maybe Friday. I have next Friday off, so maybe I will do a stream on Friday instead of Saturday. Or maybe I'll just skip it entirely. I will be back some point next week, probably Friday, maybe Saturday. I will definitely stream next week, but next week will probably be the last stream for the year. I'll probably be doing Christmas stuff, and then New Year's stuff, and then travel stuff, and then relaxing stuff. If something crazy happens, I'm sure I'll pop back on. But I think next week will be my last stream for the year, and we'll pick back up in January. And go on to 2022. Jesus Christ. All righty. Well, thank you guys, and I will have a great weekend. Have fun at work. Hopefully, this is my last week of work. Hopefully, you guys are getting close to your vacations as well. And I don't know, stay safe out there. Hopefully, you're surviving inflation. And if you're poor, consider buying an electric vehicle. All right, thanks, guys. Fox Trevize signing off. See ya.